Warning, some viewers may find the following footage deeply disturbing.
Genius.
Hi, this is Kurt Wallace at RandPaulReview.com, and we have Daniel McAdams with us. He's the director of the Ron Paul Institute and co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And we have some very important issues that we want to cover today. And this is your first time coming on the show. So Daniel, thank you so much for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, Kurt. I'm really excited to be on.
Daniel, let's start with Ukraine. From a libertarian standpoint, how do you assess the U.S. involvement in the war there? And what do you make of Trump's latest rhetoric about pressuring Russia to end the conflict?
Well, the U.S. involvement in Ukraine goes back to 2004 in the Orange Revolution. Actually, goes back before then. Excuse me, but it goes back to 2004. And this is when the neocons, who were at the time working for George W. Bush, talking about people like Victoria Nuland, who started her world working for Dick Cheney. They've long held this idea that you can overthrow Russia, break it into pieces, and somehow, I don't know, take over the country, what have you, regime change. So they started this in 2004 because that's when Yanukovych was first elected, the person, and so then he was deposed in an orange revolution that the U.S. government was behind. It was one of the early color revolutions. There was the orange in Ukraine and the rose revolution in Georgia, the country of Georgia, around that same era. So that revolution brought in Yushchenko, who was a Western-favored politician. He went on to be one of the most corrupt figures in Ukrainian history, with the blessing of the U.S. administration. And Victoria Nuland was rewarded by getting a senior's position on the Obama campaign. And now there's something important about this, which is that if you're a neocon interventionist, you just go from Democrat to Republican administrations. It's seamless. It's seamless. And so that's what she did. And so that's why in 2014, under the Obama administration, she was one of the key figures behind the Maidan Revolution, which overthrew Yanukovych again, because they had an election after this and they actually re-elected the same guy he was overthrown. Obviously, that's the person they wanted. So he gets back into office. He wants to make a deal with the EU and Russia. Hey, let's all trade together. It makes sense. They're neighbors with Russia, right? And so here comes Victoria Nuland. We know the famous phone call with Ambassador Pyatt, where she essentially, it's like she admits her guilt essentially on the intercepted phone call, that they were literally handpicking the people that should go into government. And so this is what happens when you overthrow regimes. You create chaos and you create mayhem and murder, and that's what's happened in Ukraine since the 2014 coup. So the Russian military operation that started 3 years ago on the, I don't know if this is going to air today, but on the 24th, was started after numerous efforts to say, to air grievances that Russia had. And President Trump absolutely, during the campaign, accurately captured this in his own unique and endearing way. He said, well, they expanded NATO right up to his doorstep. Who wants that? Who'd be happy about that? He has this sort of natural, almost naive sense of fairness. And obviously they're going to get ticked off. We'd feel the same way if the Chinese were doing it, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that's the origin. And it's important to understand the origin, because the prevailing narrative put out by the neocons is that Putin woke up one morning in a bad mood and said, you know what, I'm going to invade something. Who's closest? Let's go for Ukraine. It's absurd. It doesn't matter if you think he was right or wrong to invade. That's a different issue. But you have to get the history right. It's just like a doctor. You have to diagnose the problem first before you can deal with the treatment. So I'm sorry for that long antecedent. But so bringing us to the present, President Trump has come in, and I had no idea which way he would go. And I know that some of his advisors tend to be pretty anti-Russia, people like Waltz, people like Rubio. And I was pretty concerned. I was worried what would happen, because let's face it, under brain dead Joe, we were on the absolute verge of a nuclear conflict with Russia over nothing. We weren't even that close to the height of the Cold War when we actually had something ideological we disagreed on. This was over nothing. We were that close to war. So I was worried that Trump would come in, guns blazing, literally maybe, and boom, pop off the world. But thank God something different happened. All of a sudden, he I don't know who he talked to. It wasn't me. I wish he had, but whoever he talked to, I think said him right, and he was just he has the perfect couple of points to make, which is a this is Biden's war, not mine, and he's made that pretty well. And the second is you guys have had 3 years to solve this problem, and you've done nothing. I'm going to come in and I'm going to try to get the job done. I'm going to stop calling names. I'm going to be a grown up. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do a little diplomacy, unlike Blinken, who's incapable of diplomacy. I'm going to do a little something to make it happen. And I'm going to call my advisors to heel. And I'm going to tell them, look, this is the policy. I don't care what you believe, but this is what you're going to back. At least to me, as an outsider, that seems like what's happened. So, as someone who cares about my kids and the future of my country that I love, I'm happy to see it. Is it perfect? No, but I'm happy to see it.
Well, Trump's hinted at leveraging economic tools like tariffs or sanctions to influence foreign policy. How does that square with libertarian principles of free markets and non-interventionism, especially in the context of Ukraine?
Well, he doesn't have any leverage with Russia, and I hope he understands that. And if he tries to use leverage with Russia, he will fail. And I think someone must have told him that, and that's why he's been speaking a different tune. Russia has had probably the most sanctioned country in the world right now, and even anti-Russian sources are saying, well, they've reconstituted their military to twice the strength it was before. I think that was someone in one of the European military said that their GDP is growing faster than any European country, that's for sure. So they haven't brought them to their knees with the use of sanctions and these sorts of tools. And it won't work now. It just won't. I mean, Russia's too big of a country, and it's also has much more diverse interests. This isn't the world that Donald Trump stepped into in 2017. Russia has forged alliances with China and India that are very important, and even with Iran and Saudi Arabia that are very important. So it's not isolated. So it's foolish to think you can, and I think deep down he probably understands that. Um, with regard to use of tariffs and sanctions on the rest of the world, libertarians know that sanctions don't work. They never have worked. They're also an act of war, then they're act of aggression. They punish the people. Here's the thing about sanctions: they punish the people in the countries we want to overthrow. Oh, you don't like Maduro? Okay, maybe nobody does. Who cares? But when you sanction the country and you make the people as miserable as possible in the hopes that they will rise up and overthrow Maduro in Venezuela, that's stupid. It's not going to happen. It's just going to make people who should be looking to you in a positive way, looking to you negative. Hey, why am I starving? Well, it's not my fault. I mean, we feel the same way under Biden. The guy's a joke. I wish he were gone, but don't punish me. I didn't do it. I didn't vote for him. So sanctions are terrible. They don't work. Even if they work, they'd be immoral. Now, tariffs for political reasons are bad. Tariffs in the context of the country with the budget and expenditures the size of ours are bad. They may have worked in the very, very early days of the Republic, when the Republic was the size that you could strangle it in the bathtub, which is, I think Senator Paul said that once. That's what size he'd like government to be. But in this context, as anyone with a basic understanding of economics understands, that tariffs are a tax on the American people. They make products more expensive, and the poorest among us are the most vulnerable. As my Dr. Paul, not yours, as mine often says, if the bread prices double, Bill Gates is not going to have a panic attack, but the guy down the street in the trailer park, he's going to, because it makes a big difference for him. So it's a long way of saying, I as a libertarian, as an anti-state person, I hope he doesn't go down this path, because it will hurt the economy.
Well, switching gears and kind of in this kind of framework with markets, free markets, Trump's push for ramping up domestic production of resources, rare earth minerals, and we can discuss that on a domestic level as far as property rights and market freedom and government overreach, but there's a lot of talk around Ukraine, and how do you see Trump's mineral policies affecting global conflicts like Ukraine and resource control, because he's demanding those resources of Ukraine to get paid back for all that money that the previous administration and the Republican and Democrat Congresses have sent over and been wasted and disappeared over there in Ukraine, the billions of dollars there.
Well, I enjoyed the Biden administration because it was so comical. Every time he gave a he didn't give press comment. Every time he opened his mouth, there was something funny to come out of it. And
Don't.
yeah, it's great. It was from that perspective, it was fun. I think in a way, this almost falls into the category of being somewhat comedic. Um, the so-called rare earths minerals in Ukraine, at least 50% of them are located in territory that's controlled by Russia. So Russia's not going to agree to give them back. The rest of them, as far as I understand, and I'm not I'm not a geologist or whatever they are centered around Kiev, which is, you can't just kind of dig a mine in the middle of town or whatever. So it's kind of a chimera, in my opinion. My guess is that Trump knows it. My guess is that he knows that they know it, but they're all sort of using it as leverage. And this is Trump's style. He's bombastic, and I love it when it's against Europeans. He's crazy, and I think this is what he's doing. Hey, you're going to pay us back. In fact, Macron was in town, and
Do you think he's not serious about it? Is that kind of where you're?
I hope he's not, because he's not going to get it. He's not going to get those. Now,
He's kind of trolling them in a way.
I think in a way, but if he wants, the thing about Ukraine is it's Eastern Ukraine that is the industrial powerhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and Eastern Ukraine that is the breadbasket. Western Ukraine is just a bunch of skinheads and Nazis. Basically, people in Lvov who are celebrating the SS, they don't do a lot of factory work. So the part of the country that Russia will not give up, Russia considers it constitutionally part of Russia. They held a referendum. They're 90+% Russian speaking. They were part of Russia up until a very, very short time ago. Certainly, more recently than California was part of the U.S., what have you. They're not going back. So, but I think it is leverage, and I think it's comedic when President Trump turned to Macron and said, "Well, you guys, all that money you gave him was just a loan, right?" And Macron said, "Oh no, we are giving it to them." And Trump made this look like, "You guys are a bunch of saps, you morons." That was classic Trump, in my opinion. He's a master troll. He really is.
Well, if people could be a little bit more detached and unemotional and not buy into some of the rhetoric, they can enjoy what he says and does. Moving on to Gaza. Okay, let's get.
An
This is
easy
not.
one, right? Let's
This
have an
is not
easy one.
not a laughing matter at all.
Yeah.
But there's obviously we know the libertarian critique of Israel's actions in the war there, but and we can talk about the non-aggression principle around war and all of that. But the reality is that war has happened, total a lot of destruction, a lot of death. Where does it start? We have to go back in deep history and the CIA's involvement as well. But without getting into the minutia of all of that, my question sounds convoluted as hell the way I just talked about it, but maybe not to everybody. But Trump's recently floated the idea of taking over Gaza and turning it into some kind of an international hub. From a libertarian's perspective, is this a wild overstep of state power, or could it be framed as a pragmatic end to a conflict? Because there is some interesting ideas around that. If it was able to be resolved and everyone benefited from it, if it was a win-win-win-win-win situation for everybody, but is that realistic?
Well, Trump is known as a real estate person. That's where his money comes from, and I'm certainly nowhere on that level. But I've sold a couple of houses, and I bought a couple of houses. And one thing that I do know is you have to do a title search. You have to be assured that the house you are buying is from a person who actually owns that house. So I would think the basics of real estate would suggest to President Trump, you can't get a title of this because it's not your land. So that's a problem, I think, in terms of that. In terms of the conflict itself, yes, Israel's behavior has been abominable. But as an American, my blame is on the U.S. government, because we gave him all the money, we gave him all the weapons, and Joe Biden turned the other way. And people that want to support Israel, you're not doing them any favors with U.S. policy. It's the idea of moral hazard in economics when you When you promise to backstop someone, no matter what kind of investment they make, then they're going to make more and more risky investments. And if you do that in foreign policy, you're going to encourage riskier and riskier behavior. And so that's what we've done. So yes, what they've done is terrible, but I'm more concerned with what we've done to facilitate it. With a non-interventionist foreign policy, Israel would not have the wherewithal to do what it has done over there, and it would have been forced just by the nature of its limited resources and by the neighborhood that it's in. It would have been forced to sit down and say, we need to find a way to deal with it. People say October 7th, yes, but this happened much before October 7th. So as you point out very well, it's a long story. It's an open festering wound. If they had the incentive to solve it, they would have gone a lot further. So we're not doing them any favors. Everyone in the entire region, indeed the entire world, hates their guts. That's not a good position to be in right now. So we didn't do them any favors. Giving your kid candy nonstop 24/7, they may like it, but you're not doing them any favors.
Well, if the U.S. did take control of Gaza, I mean, there's a natural instinct in human beings that you can't take my property. You talk about title searches, and there's a self-determination core. I don't care who it is, what religion there is. That is an inherent part of each human being. Don't come into my home and invade my home. And you have libertarian values in there somewhere, and in each region. Doesn't matter what region it is. There's sort of there's fundamental rules of economics. I learned that from Ron Paul. First time I interviewed him, he said, I asked him a dumb question because I was just learning about it all. This is back in 08. And he said, well, Kurt, I don't predict anything, because I'd asked him, how do you predict all of these things? And he says, well, I don't. There's just fundamental rules of economics. Well, there's also fundamental rules of human behavior and reactions to acts of aggression, even if they're not with a gun, right? And so I guess, if they do take control of Gaza, what do you think the implications are of this violation of property rights with these individuals?
Yeah, it's bad, but they won't be able to. That's the problem. I mean,
Yep.
even if you think you're going to ethnically cleanse 2 million people, it won't happen. The resistance will continue, and there's already been now a new generation of resistance that's even more radical than it was before. So that's why they're in worse shape. But you simply can't do that. I mean, I'm in Texas, you don't come and take someone's property. We're well armed down here. I'll tell you that. Come and take it. Yeah, literally. So, so I think it's unrealistic. I think the thing that I think is so unusual, Kurt, is I think that Trump was genuinely flummoxed. He was genuinely, he genuinely was surprised that people didn't glom onto this idea. And it made me wonder what kind of a bubble he may be in, because as you know, his son-in-law, Jared, floated it a couple of months ago. Hey, there's some nice beachfront property there, and I just wonder how much the inner circle around Trump has said, they're going to love it. Don't worry, Mr. President. Everyone's going to think it's the best deal of the century. And when he did say it, the rest of the world gasped, because you haven't had this kind of forced movement of a population since, I won't be specific, but a very dark period in history.
Thank you to the Rand Paul Review community for your support of The Kurt Wallace Show. We are now syndicated on Spotify. For those who are new to Rand Paul Review, become a subscriber today. It's absolutely free to join. Go to randpaulreview.com, put in your email address. You'll receive our newsletter, articles, and podcast interviews. We just ask that you share our content with others. If you like what you're getting from Rand Paul Review and you want more, I encourage you to become a paid subscriber for just $8 a month. You'll receive full access to exclusive articles, behind-the-scenes interviews, and the community chat room. Plus, we're giving away tons of swag in 2025. Annual subscribers get 20% off, so check that out. Whether you're a free or paid subscriber, thank you for your participation and support at randpaulreview.com. We have Daniel McAdams with us, director of the Ron Paul Institute, and yes, that is. It seems like he's thinking like a real estate investor in a sense, right? And he's not understanding the things that we seem to understand. He's got mineral ambitions, and his idea of taking over Gaza, they kind of overlap in this expansionist vibe. And I guess that's where we start to recoil, like from a hot flame. We're like, whoa, no, no, this smells like neoconservatism. This smells
Mhm.
like, globalism. It's kind of like the antithesis of everything we're about, and it also is very similar to what this revolution has been about to get rid of the elitists in both parties. Right? They're all about that. So, do you see a pattern here with Trump, or are you worried? Should libertarians be concerned about this shift that the America First approach means globalization and expansionism?
Yeah, in a way, I mean, I would say that Trump is not a globalist, and it's not necessarily globalism. I think it's sort of a neo-colonial reaction to globalism, which is sort of interesting. You talk about, I want Greenland, I'm going to take it. You
Mhm.
know, I want Canada, we're going to take it. And again, there is that comedic aspect, which is that Denmark has given literally its entire military to Ukraine. And now that it has to defend Greenland against the US, it's got like three guys in a broom or something, you know. I mean, that's it. We don't have anything left. We got a couple of VWs. I don't know. Um, so
Mhm.
there's a comic aspect, but it is kind of yeah, I mean, there's an element of Teddy Roosevelt in it, and it's bombastic.
Mhm.
But you know, Dr. Paul came out with his weekly column today, and he cited a couple of interesting. This is on Monday the 24th, and he cited
Mhm.
some interesting statistics, some interesting recent polling numbers that showed that the Americans are they're a little bit dissatisfied with how Trump's handled the economy so far. Now it's early in the administration, but
Mhm.
it shows that their chief concern right now is inflation. And that's a big deal. And so I don't think the average American wants to know about whether we're going to take over Greenland or Canada. They don't want to pay $10 for eggs. You know, it hits closer to home. So there's a way he can do that. And you touched on it earlier with regard to the resources that we have here in the US. And I feel confident that he's going to do a good job when it comes to that. But I think he's being a little bit distracted by some of these for lack of a better word, it says it's sort of a leftist term, but sort of a neo-colonialist, I would say a nationalist neo-colonialist response to globalism.
Let's switch gears, Daniel. And we're still talking about foreign policy, but a little twist on it. We're talking about civil liberties in foreign policy, and Europe has seen a rise in laws restricting speech. Think of UK's online speech, or I'm sorry, Online Safety Act, and then Germany's hate speech regulations. It's pretty far-reaching, and it's almost it's a very strange thing to see this kind of government control and reaction to speech. Um, from a libertarian standpoint, how do you see the measures clashing with fundamental rights to free expression and broader implications to individual liberty? Is it a concern for us here in the United States, considering we have the biggest violator, troll Trump, and speech, and Elon Musk and X and that sort of thing? Um, you know, it or what's your impression of what they're doing over there, and can they sustain it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's had a relatively long history, and they don't have the kind of history of free speech that we have in the U.S. or should have, and for the most part have had. But I really do think a catalyzing factor was the
Mhm.
COVID scam, whatever you want to call it, because what we saw in Europe was incredible. It was bad enough here, obviously, what
Mhm.
we saw in Europe was incredible. We saw the authoritarians really flex their muscles. They seemed to really enjoy it. The crackdowns were extreme, and they used the virus, or whatever you want to think about it,
Mhm.
as a excuse for them to crack down on their population viciously, relentlessly. And so now we're not that whole scare is gone, while the mechanism for oppression is still remains, and that's very interesting to me, and that's why I think excuse me, when the vice president, when JD Vance went over to Munich and he gave them a lecture. Now, as a non-interventionist, on the one hand, I would say, well, we don't need to tell them what to do. But on
Mhm.
the other hand, I think he framed it. I'm sounding like a sycophant. I'm not, honestly. We can go into my criticisms, um, but he framed it in a way that I think was constructive. In that you guys need to be like us, you know, or else. He
Mhm.
framed it in a way of saying, look, you talk a lot about shared values, but I look at how we're diverging in our value system, and I just wonder what are these shared values we're talking? You canceling elections because the wrong guy won. You're throwing people in jail for their tweets. So I think he framed it in about the right way to criticizing them, but without telling them what they should or have to do, or using a coercion to make them do it.
Well, you mentioned the tweets and harm say and disinformation, and that argument that government needs to protect society from words. Um, we as libertarians, we often argue that private entities like social media platforms shouldn't be forced to moderate speech. Yet European governments are pressuring these companies to censor content. What's your take on this dynamic, and how does that affect the marketplace of ideas for Europe? Does it hurt Europe as in terms of economics, in a sense? It does relate, because it lessens people's ability to, they have to be cautious about what they say. And it also affects those businesses in Europe that are social media companies and how they operate there, and what's going to drive them. Is it going to go to a black market of social media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I moved to Hungary right after communism ended,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah,
Wow.
so there was still the big hangover, and I do remember going down to the payphone rather than talking on my phone in my apartment in my flat. And at the time, I thought how absurd it was. You have to be careful what you say. This is so ridiculous. I mean, I'm so glad they're getting rid of this crap. And and yeah, we have it. I mean, we have it. And don't forget, the Europeans are terrible about this and getting worse. But we had it too. I mean, and it's only thanks to people like Matt Taibbi, Mike Schellenberger, and Elon himself that we had kind of a truth commission. We found out just how deeply embedded our own government was with these social media companies, and the force that they used, the coercion they used to get them to censor thoughts that they didn't want other Americans to hear. So they could say, well, Senator Paul, no one else is talking about immunity. You must be wrong, you know? And the reason no one else was saying it because they were all censored. So we have that. There is that inclination here. We can't get too uppity about this because there are authoritarians everywhere here, and they like nothing better than to control what we speak. But it was by some miracle or some grace of God, for all of his faults, and we know there are many, that an Elon came along and said, "Okay, I'm gonna rip the curtain aside and let's see just exactly what the heck was going on." I think that was a world-changing event to see how ugly these totalitarians are in our midst.
Well, it's like the pendulum swung so far one way with the COVID lockdowns and all of the overreach, and this reaction just seems like it. We had to get really toxically sick as a
Yeah.
society in order to come back to our senses, and maybe that was the fever breaking.
Yeah.
Hopefully it was. Like everything you're talking about with the Twitter files and exposing all of that.
I
I
mean,
you know
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I mean, I go on X a lot, and sometimes you see people that see something that is disgusting. Maybe someone attacks you in a really nasty way, or someone says something very ugly about another race or religion. The
Mhm.
beauty of it is you just block them. You never have to see them again. If there's some jerk there, I just block him. I never see him again. It's so easy. I mean, it's the idea that I gotta drop a dime and call, Elon, you got to get rid of this guy. He's hurting my feelings. It's so ridiculous.
I joke with people when they take a shot at me. I'm like, that hurt my feeling, but just the one feeling, not all the feelings. The rest of them don't care. We got
Yeah.
to, uh, lighten up a little bit, not make such a big deal. Look at Ron Paul as an example. Ron Paul was attacked viciously during the 2008 campaign, not by the left, but by the
Mhm.
right. And we come to find out everything that he said has been embraced by the Republican Party. Not everything, but a lot of the
Yeah.
things he said has been embraced by the Republican Party. And but he never said a foul thing about anyone else. He's never been nasty, and that's a real interesting uh, character. Like he didn't get hurt about it. He knows what his principles and his beliefs are. If you're truly strong in that, why would you have to feel hurt or upset if somebody doesn't see it? If they don't see it, they just don't see it. That's their perspective. but he's always emphasized non-interventionism and self-determination. How do you think, just going back to Europe, Europe's speech restrictions, like those targeting anti-immigration views, do you think they reflect a deeper cultural or political shift away from individual sovereignty there? And do you think that that's influencing us at all? I don't think it is, but it.
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. I mean, we had to go so far that we had a bounce back, and I think you're seeing some of that. The relative success of the AfD in Germany is tremendous. Now they didn't win; they came in second. But the idea of the Alliance for of the AfD being Alternative for Germany being a second party, second strongest party, is incredible. The same is true in France. The same is true in you're seeing now we had elections last year in Slovakia with Robert Fico taking over. We
Mhm.
had elections in Romania, but they canceled them because the wrong guy almost won. You're seeing a backlash. Croatia, for example, Austria, for example. So you're seeing that. I think it might just be a little bit slower there, but let's hope it is moving in the right direction. Viktor Orban has set a great example using Hungary as saying no to a lot of the bad things that Europe has tried to do. And look, he's won. I mean, he's friends with Trump. This is a small country. I lived there. I was in exile from the Clinton era. I went to live there for the '90s because I didn't want to live in Clinton's, America. But I mean, this is a little country. It's not powerful. It's not rich. But look at the prime minister through the force of his own will and the content of his character. He's now, his stature is massive on the world stage. It's incredible to see.
You mentioned JD Vance earlier, going over and having a talk with them around all of these violations. And the First Amendment tradition in the United States is very strong here. They don't. You mentioned that they don't have that specifically there. It's not the same kind of thing. But what role do you think the Trump administration, Elon Musk, will play? Do you think it's going to end up biting them like it has with the establishment here in the United States and the left, when all they have is censorship and calling people Nazis and racist and all that sort of stuff? Does it end up what we've seen with the Trump I guess the way I'd like to frame this, to ask you this, what we've seen with the Trump administration and Trump's, not his administration, but his whole career in politics, has been that everything that they throw at him, it's like it ends up uh, turning bad for them. It ends up going in the other direction. There is a reaction to trying to put him in jail, trying to shoot him, trying all the things that have happened there with him specifically. And is that going to play out in Europe? Is that going to end up being the case that people are not going to accept that? People are going to fight back. People are going to resist, and we'll see another kind of a revolution like we've had here in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, Europe is run by extremely unpopular people, and it has been for a long time. I mean, that's why the European Commission is structured the way it is. That they're not elected.
Mhm.
Ursula von der Leyen is not elected, so when she lectures, and I think J.D. Vance may have said it, or actually, it was Jaishankar, the foreign minister of India, who basically said in Munich, "Listen, don't lecture India about democracy, Ursula. We have elections. We're the biggest democracy. You weren't elected. Nobody voted for you. So and that's true with the entire European Commission. Kaya Kallas. Nobody voted for you, Kaya. Nobody voted for you. So there is that kind of crisis there, and I think people who are deeply unpopular and they're politicians, their egos are fragile and they are extremely resentful toward large personalities who are popular. And that's why part of the reason why Putin is hated, part of the reason why Viktor Orban in Hungary is hated, because Lukashenko in Belarus, they are hated by European politicians like Macron because they genuinely are popular. Does it make them perfect? No, but people genuinely like them and continue to vote for them.
Hmm.
The Europeans hate that. They hate that.
Daniel McAdams, director of the Ron Paul Institute and co-host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Thank you for spending time with us today on Rand Paul Review.
Thank you so much, Kurt.
Genius.